While an understanding between Seoul and Washington has been reached to bring home the hundreds of South Korean workers detained by U.S. federal agents during a raid at the Hyundai plant in Georgia last week, the ripple effects of the event continue across the corporate arena and beyond. Hello and welcome to Tuesday's edition of Press Perspective. It's September 9th here in Seoul. I'm Min Sunhee. Pundits have pointed to the optics of the recent raid by U.S. officials at the Hyundai plant in Georgia, affirming that it is, or it looks, that is, quote, terrible and casts an uncertain light on future business ventures. For more on this, I have Steven Borowiec with Japanese weekly news magazine Nikkei Asia here in the studio. Steven, welcome back.
Thank you.
I also have Professor Kim Yong Jin at Sogang University joining our session virtually. Professor Kim, it's good to have you on.
Good afternoon.
Right, Steven.
Happy to be here.
Right, thank you for being here, Professor Kim. We will start with you. Steven, let's begin with the ongoing response to the recent raid on the Hyundai plant in Georgia. What is the latest there?
In your intro, Sunny, you mentioned optics. I think that's a key part of it. And in yesterday and today, like reading the local reaction, I would just say that I've been in Korea for quite a long time, and like rarely have I seen something that seemed to get a kind of almost uniform reaction from across the political spectrum. Basically, everybody who's been following this seems to be pretty outraged by it. There's a few things that I would say. In the article that I wrote just yesterday about this, I quoted an editorial from the Joseon Ilbo newspaper that called this contradictory. And I think that's a key point because on one hand, you have the Trump administration very quite aggressively like soliciting outside investments in the United States and basically telling Korean firms and firms from other countries, like if you want to have access to the U.S. consumer market, if you want to sell products to American buyers, you are going to have to make those products in the United States. And these South Korean companies have complied. They've announced these very large investments. And as they are now trying to carry out those pledges, you have ICE carrying out this raid and arresting the people that are on the ground trying to get these factories up and running. So I think this is spurring a few different emotions. Like one of them, I think, is just kind of befuddlement at the contradictory nature that I just laid out. It's just kind of confusion at like, is this just a case of different branches of the American government, like maybe having competing objectives and like the right hand not really knowing what the left hand is doing? I mean, did the authorities at ICE who authorized this raid, were they communicating with whatever the department of the government is that handles outside investment? Was there just like a lack of communication there, or ICE is up to a lot of very aggressive and very kind of theatrical things in the United States nowadays. Another thing I just think is, I think there's a sense of betrayal here in South Korea. There's just a sense that like, the two countries have this decades-old alliance. They like to talk about how this is forged in blood. They like to talk about how it's ironclad. They like to have these regular meetings where they reaffirm their commitment to cooperation and all the rest. It's been a quite mutually beneficial relationship for a very long time. And then they see U.S. authorities not only carrying out this raid, but like another factor, like I said, you mentioned optics. Not only did they do this, but they quite deliberately took a video of it. And they posted it online, and there's these images now on the internet of Korean engineers being shackled and led out of their workplace and put on a bus and being kind of treated as if they were criminals. Another thing that I think we can get into is like the specifics of what is required to work in the United States with proper authorization. If you read the Korean business press, as I've been doing over the past couple days, you will see that there's a kind of acknowledgement in the Korean corporate community that you just simply cannot have, every time you send someone on an overseas business trip, you don't always have time to get them like the exact visa. That takes a long time, and sometimes it's easier to just send somebody over as a tourist if all they're going to do is just be like attending a meeting or conducting a training session or something like that. It's not as though these people are going to the United States to like work for an American company and like earn local income. So in business, there's a lot of things that you sacrifice, absolute fealty to every letter of the law because you need to get things done. And that's like a kind of open understanding in international business. And so it raises a lot of questions as to why the Trump administration, at this juncture of all times, when they have been telling Korean companies that they want them to come into the US, why they have decided to go ahead with this very, very specific and very aggressive form of enforcement. So there's a lot of questions here, and I think we'll be talking about this for a while.
All right, and a lot of the ideas you've just mentioned, the concerns that you've just shared, Stephen, are concerns shared by pundits here in the country. Professor Kim, what looks to be the broader impact of this latest development on trade ties between Seoul and Washington, do you think?
Well, as Steve well explained, I think, he's more than Korean in terms of explanation of the raid and the responses. So I heard it very well. Basically, before it gets to the point, I'd like to explain a little bit of the fact about the factory building. So the battery factory development project of Hyundai Motors and LG Energy Solution has been known to be Korea's flagship investment project in the U.S. It is a $4.3 billion joint venture battery facility, among the largest project in Georgia, and expected to create 8,500 jobs. It was scheduled for completion later this year to supply battery cells to Hyundai Motors in a nearby electrical vehicle factory, Hyundai Motor Group, Meta Plant America LLC. The construction work on the site was suspended now, following the raid. The incident has drawn Korea's flagship, investment project in the U.S. into disarray. As a result, I guess that at least 22 other factory sites involving Korean business groups in automobile, shipbuilding, steel and electrical equipment, and semiconductor has been nearly halted. How will this, result affect Korea and U.S. trade relationship? I'm not quite sure, even though President Trump said our, ally is still strong. I mean, there's no changes. But, one thing which is very clear is that the speed of the investment will slow down, as the uncertainty of the business in the U.S. is increasing. It will absolutely affect the Korea-U.S. trade relationship in a negative way.
And that being said, then, Professor Kim, how do you see trade officials here in the country responding to this raid and its ripple effects?
Yeah, basically there are, two categories of responses. First one is about how to get the detained Korean, people to safely return to Korea. And, what the second is what we have to do in the future to prevent the raid, from happening again. The Korean officials said the goal is for all of the South Koreans to return home on a chartered flight. Unfortunately, South Korea announced Sunday and then today actually that the U.S. has agreed to release them, and then that it would bring them home on a charter flight once final administrative steps are completed. The second part is how to prevent a similar incident. The Korean officials mentioned that preventing reoccurrence, will require close coordination with the U.S. and greater effort by companies to obtain the correct visas. Korean companies, doing business with the United States have expressed a great deal of frustration over the difficulties in obtaining proper visas for their employees, both before and during the current, Trump administration. This issue need to be resolved soon. Basically, Korean officials, in the face, they don't say we are frustrated, we're angry. They don't say that, but they are deeply, frustrated, in front of this, incident. But they are prepared to proceed with the further relationship with the U.S. By solving those visa problems in the middle of the huge investment.
Right. And to address some of those problems, of course, or to address those problems, Foreign Minister Cho Hyun is currently in the U.S. Stephen, with regard to these ICE raids, quite a number of critics believe that such raids will serve to hurt America's manufacturing industry as a whole. What have you been hearing?
I can see this having a real chilling effect. I mean, just because we're already hearing some South Korean companies have already said that they're halting certain forms of business travel to the U.S., or some companies have instructed their employees who are already in the U.S. to kind of keep a low profile and to, maybe not report to their workplaces, like work from their accommodations if they can. I mean, I think the most basic part of the fallout from this is that this is inevitably going to mean that it takes longer for these factories to get up and running. I think the nature of the dispatch of a lot of the South Korean personnel who were there was, these are people from the home office who understand, how the machines in these factories work. They understand how these factories are laid out. They understand how this all goes together. Like, this is not something that you can hire a local person to do. You can't hire somebody who's never been in this kind of Korean factory to say, okay, well, you are in Georgia, you go to this construction site and you help them set it up. Like, that's just not feasible. So it is not as though these people are taking jobs that Americans could do. They do need to be there to get this operation up and running. And if the Trump administration's objective is really to have these factories up and functioning, then this is a kind of self-defeating measure. More long-term, like beyond like this particular case and beyond the kind of short term of like how this might affect U.S. manufacturing, I just wonder how it's going to affect further investments in the U.S. because among countries like South Korea and Japan, kind of U.S. allies, they've been quite compliant and they've been quite generous in going along with the Trump administration's demands, and they've kind of, even if, as Professor Kim alluded, even if like privately they are frustrated by this, publicly they have put on a brave face and they've gone along with all this. I wonder if they might, their patience might start to run out, and there might be a shift not just in corporate boardrooms, but in South Korean public opinion, where the conventional wisdom could change and the conventional wisdom could evolve to a point where enough people in the public and enough people in government and in business feel like maybe it is not wise to have generous and very large-scale investments in the U.S. under the current climate, because as we saw last week, these investments are not necessarily stable and they are not necessarily able to function as planned if you are going to have interference from various levels of the U.S. government. So time will only tell as to like what the long-term effects of this will be, but like I do think this might, like a year or two from now, or 5 years from now, or 10 years from now, we might be looking back on this as a kind of turning point, because I cannot remember another case like this in the history of the alliance between the South Korea and the U.S., where the South Koreans felt as though felt just kind of as put upon by this and as displeased with something like this. So it could have some real effects down the road.
Right. Keeping in mind what Stephen has just said, Professor Kim, you mentioned earlier about how foreign investment, the speed of foreign investment into the U.S. may slow down. What about the size of the investment? Do you suppose the raid on Hyundai looked to affect direct foreign investment into the U.S. from South Korea, as well as from America's other partners?
Well, absolutely, that's yes, right? What the market, the business do not like the most is uncertainty. President Trump has asked the Korean companies, to invest a substantial amount of money in the U.S., but he won't provide the incentives, infrastructures, and skilled labor. And rather, he is implementing top measures for immigration, so that the high-skilled employees cannot come into the U.S. Who want to invest in the U.S. in this situation, like, Steve mentioned, right? Even though companies decided to put money into the U.S. as planned, employees want to go to the U.S. In the face of that kind of risk of arrest. Considering the time to get proper visa, the construction schedule may be delayed to put more burden on the companies would invest in the U.S. So in the long term, U.S. might lose a lot of investment from its allies, not only from Korea, from Taiwan, Japan, and UK and EU. Whole bunch of countries might be concerned about this raid, and then the legal right to be in the U.S. as the worker. But they have very tight schedule to complete the factory, and then and they have to really rethink how to deal with, how to proceed with this investment.
Right, quite a lot on their plate then. Moving forward, Stephen, but against this backdrop, Mr. Trump's sons, Eric and Donald Jr., they are going to be in South Korea this month to partake in cryptocurrency promotions, if you will. Eric is currently here to partake in a conference, cryptocurrency conference. What are your takeaways?
Well, the details are that Eric is here to take place in something called Upbit D conference, and Donald Jr. will be taking part in Korea Blockchain Week. I mean, as you said, Sunny, there's a promotional element to all this. I mean, the Trump family have really embraced crypto in all its complexity and all its commercial potential, as a kind of tool for making money in a way that's not immediately traceable, or doesn't have the most meticulous paper trail. I think it's right up their alley. So South Korea is in some ways a promising market for crypto. I think on a per capita basis, Korea has some of the one of the highest prevalences of people who are into crypto and into trading. So I think that's why they're here. I think it makes sense for them to want to come to Korea as a fairly big market, as a market that customarily has had quite positive feelings about the U.S. Maybe they're not arriving here at the most advantageous time. Maybe they'll face some questions as to what we've been talking about, but it should be easy for them to just present themselves as business people and say that they're not here as representatives of the U.S. government or representatives of the U.S. in any kind of holistic sense. They're just here to talk about the exciting opportunities that their coins provide. Right.
And Professor Kim, how do you explain the interest in the Korean crypto market from the Trump brothers?
Well, Korean crypto market is known to be one of the most active in its transaction and one of the largest in its volume of investment. When it comes to the Trump family, major Korean exchanges, including Upbit, Bitsum, and then CoinOne, have listed WLFI, and a governance token launched by World Liberty Financial, a decentralized finance project led by the Trump family. Trading opened at 10 p.m. Monday on Upbit and Bitsum, and followed by the CoinOne at 11 a.m. Tuesday. The project, stablecoin USD1, has also been listed on Upbit and Bitsum, with trading beginning at 4 p.m. Monday. Donald Trump Jr. and Eric Trump are listed as the co-founders and hold key executive role of the project, while President Trump hold the title of honorary co-founder, which cannot be possible in Korea anyway. With the largest listings across the world, the Trump family's cryptocurrency holdings are estimated to be worth around $5 billion US, according to the Wall Street Journal. They own approximately 25% of the total WLF token supply. So this is, they want to promote their token to Korean people.
Right, Stephen, as Professor Kim has alluded, the Trump family's crypto venture has been triggering conflict of interest concerns. What have you been hearing again?
I mean, conflict of interest seems almost like a quaint notion at this point. We haven't really seen much from the Trump family that signals that that's something that they're all that concerned about, like the perception that the Trump family or even Trump himself are using political office for personal financial gain. There's something that they're pretty open about. I mean, the way that we're talking about conflict of interest in this instance kind of reminds me of when I was young, the idea of selling out you know, if you were a public figure or if you were a creative person or an artist of some time, that like you had this kind of responsibility to like guard your integrity and like not sell out, like not do things just for money, not do, you know, not like work with, you know, the corporate side of your field. But that's not something that anybody talks about anymore. I mean, I think anybody who's younger than like 30 is like unfamiliar with that concept, and they just see it as natural that like a creative person or a public figure would do everything they can to like maximize their personal value, to make as much money as they can, to like have as big of a public profile as they can. And I think a kind of similar dynamic is at work here. I think Americans are kind of getting, because of the Trump era, Americans are kind of getting used to the concept that like a public figure would, specifically the president, like, or a politician, somebody who's like on paper supposed to be a civil servant, that this person would have business interests, and that this person, like while in office, would be, you know, looking to maximize their brand and maximize their interests, and, you know, all the ways that like previously just corporate language have like infiltrated all areas of life. You know, we now talk about public servants in the way that we would talk about entrepreneurs or entertainers or any kind of other people. But I think time will really tell just how much norms have changed when we get to the next administration. I mean, like, will the next American president want to, whoever that is, will want to like enact a kind of return to the way that things used to work, the kind of more quaint norms of old American public life when people cared more about things like conflict of interest. But we'll see. I don't think that, I will just say that while the Trump sons are here, I don't think that they will be losing any sleep over the possibility that they are involved in some kind of conflict of interest.
Right. I feel like we'll be talking about this again in another session. According to the foreign media, President Trump is hoping to host next year's G20 summit at one of his hotels.
Oh, wow.
Professor Kim, how is Mr. Trump impacting the crypto market, and what should South Korea keep an eye on, very briefly speaking?
Well, you know, that's quite interesting development, right? Like I mentioned, in Korea, a lot of lawmakers were charged, you know, and investigated, you know, due to they have, you know, cryptos. Anyway, it's a totally different conditions. There are two venues, you know, Trump family influence the crypto market. One is meme coin, the family issued. It has been, you know, well traded in the crypto market to give, you know, fortune to the Trump family. The other is the stable coin, for which, you know, Federal Reserve Board, you know, the central bank of, you know, of the U.S. is prohibited to issue by the law of anti-CBDC Act. Korean government need to keep its eye on the outflow of Korean capital to the U.S. and the monopolistic power of the U.S. dollar-based, you know, stable coin. In the meantime, Korean government need to seriously consider how to create value of digital assets to provide investment opportunities to Korean people and, you know, foreign investors, so that we as a country, right, Korea can, you know, get the capital inflow into Korea. Moreover, Korean government need to consider how to build the crypto ecosystem, including, you know, Korean won-based stable coin, to compete with the U.S. stable coins. It won't be a rosy road to gain the competitiveness in the crypto market, but we, as a sovereign country, need to do something about it. Because, you know, every asset will become digital in the future, and the competitive advantage in the digital world will be critical in the future for the further economic success.
Right, I see. And on that note, Professor Kim, I'll have to end it today. As always, thank you so much for your time and your thoughts.
My pleasure to be here.
And Steven, thank you very much for your insights.
Thank you.
Right, well, that is all the time we have today. We return with more panel discussion, same time tomorrow. Do join us then.